everybody, it's Lisa Benson from Benson's Boas, and today I'm going to talk to you about how I tame my boas. Someone asked me, actually it's a pretty common question that I get, is, my boas seem pretty tame, and actually they are very docile, and someone asked me how they get that way. So I wanted to cover that. And first I have to say that, this is just the methods I use. It may not work for every boa and it may not work for every person, but it's worked well for me. So we'll start there. By the way, this is Harlow. He's my only morph boa, and he's just a wonderful boy. He's a 2021 sunset boa. And he's just a pet, and I absolutely adore him. He's the sweetest boy ever. So I brought him out just to start off with. This is a boy that I absolutely trust. He's got the best personality ever, and he loves to come out and just be with me. He loves to hang out on the boa gym, and so I just figured I'd hold him while I started off talking. But so to start off talking, I think the best way to start off is when a boa first arrives. So I highly recommend getting boas when they're young. It's the best way to establish a relationship with a boa, and really I think most animals are that way. You get them young, and then you build that trust relationship with them. So the way I start off is when they first come to me, they've gone through some sort of journey. Usually, they've come through shipping of some sort, and it's likely pretty traumatic for them. So when they first arrive and they come out of their bag, I take them out of the box and I let them come out of their bag. I make that as quiet an experience for them as I can. And I want to look them over carefully to make sure that, that there's no problems with them. And I, take some pictures, brief pictures, just for my own records, and I weigh them. I look them over to make sure that there's no evidence of any problems, so I can respond to the seller and let them know that everything is okay. And then, I've already set up their enclosure for them previously and got everything dialed in. And then, I very quickly get them established into their new location in their quarantine bin. I don't spend any time at that point handling them because I think it's very important to get them into a quiet space where they can, rehydrate, drink, just settle down, because they've had a traumatic journey. So that's the first thing I do, and I really don't disturb them for days. I resist. It's the hardest thing ever. All of you know it's the toughest time ever, and I hold off waiting to feed them for that first week, and I really don't. I don't feed them for a week, and then when I do that first feeding, it's going to be a small feeding. And I then don't handle them again after that first feeding until I see that they've defecated and gone through a complete digestive cycle. And once they've done that complete digestive cycle, now I feel that it's okay to start working with them. And that's really how I begin the building of trust. So I've let them settle in. They've gotten used to me being in the room with them. They've gotten used to me looking into their enclosure or their bin, sliding open, changing their water, looking quickly through their substrate, not doing anything to disturb them, but just looking. And they're used to me at this point, like that. And, the babies will, at that point, sometimes be defensive and hissing. But I don't worry about that, because that's what babies are. They're just little defensive creatures. Everything is big, everything is scary. And at that point, after that first digestive cycle is done, that's when I start to work with them. And at that point, you know, the handling of them is pretty straightforward. And I have a smaller, I have a smaller boa in a bin that I will show you how I do this with in a moment. I will put Harlow away and show you this. And this boa is a little defensive, so I can show you that. I just have to get my camera. It's a little challenging because I don't have anyone helping me film. So you'll have to bear with me while I do this. So this is Ava, and Ava is a little defensive. And I've had her here for a while, but she is a little bit of a defensive baby. You can see she's posturing a little bit. She may hiss. But what I do with her is I'm just kind of confident when I approach her. And I'm going to let her know, I'm going to touch her, and then I'm going to confidently just reach in. You notice she's very rigid when I pick her up. And she's going to hiss a little. But I just go ahead and pick her up. I support the back of her body. And I'm just going to hold her and support her body, and she gets over that pretty quickly. I don't overreact to it, and I just give her the support she needs, and I'm not afraid of her. I just hold her and let her get over that. And I don't know if you could see that, how I did that, but you know, as I work with her over time, you know, she gets better and better. And once she gets over that initial rigidity, she's fine. So that's just how I approach it. It's like a confident pickup from that back third of the neck, right about here, and then just approaching her and picking her up. And every time I do it, she just gets better and better. So that's how I do it with Ava. Now, some boas are what I call runners, and they tend to be boas that they're very reactive, and when they're young, and they tend to, you know, be very alert. When you open the door of the enclosure, and I don't know if you can see this girl in here. I'm going to try to move this a little closer so you can see her. She's very ready. And when I reach in here with the hook, she's, you know, already very alert. So what I'm going to do is just stroke her very lightly with this hook, make her aware I'm not in here to feed her. And I'm just going to now reach in, and you see she's very, very alert. And I'm just going to pick her up now, and she's fine. So I can put the hook down. I don't do anything to, you know, pick them up with the hook. I'm just using it to turn off that feeding response. And now she's coiled up on her plant. So I'm going to get her uncoiled off the plant. And here she is. So let me get her out. And here is Sarita. So Sarita is one of these boas. When I first started working with her, she ran through my hands and was quite twitchy is what I'd call it. Like everything she hit, even herself, she would react quite, you know, very reactive to it. So she'd bounce off herself almost. And I've had a few boas like this where it's like everything they touch, they kind of react strongly to. And with her, I found working with gloves helped her get used to the contact. But, you know, back then, oops, going down my shirt, blooper reel, hang on. Back then, she was, you know, very much like reactive like that. And she would, you know, run through my hands. And I got her over that by just continuously letting her do that calmly and gently, you know, not overreacting to it. And eventually she just got used to that. I think some boas really don't like when we get a little clammy. You know, it's warm in this room. It's humid and warm. And, you know, we get a little sticky and they stick to us. And sometimes they don't like that. And I think that was part of it with her, and the gloves helped with that. And then, you know, as she learned that I wasn't going to hurt her, she started relaxing. But she is still a boa that I would say is, you know, very alert and very, you know, highly aware of what's going on around her. And she's a boa that I won't just reach in and, you know, pull her out of the substrate, because that would be risking a food response type bite. That's a good segue into what are the different types of boa bites, and I'll talk about that now. Let me just put Sarita away. This is little Andre. He's a very well-adjusted little guy. Let me just fix this a little bit. Andre is a Bolivian Amarelli, and he's coming along very nicely, very relaxed little boy. And so the different kinds of, what I was going to talk about is the different kinds of reactions you can expect from a boa. And the two that I've run into are the feeding response bite and the defensive bite. And I've gotten both of them, and I'll show you an example in a clip here, not for clickbait, but just so you can see the difference. You know, a food response bite is when a boa, you know, mistakes you for food. And, you know, they can do that either because you have scent on your hand of a rodent or perhaps of another snake. You didn't wash your hands between handling, you know, a prey item, or you didn't wash your hands between handling another snake, and your hands are warm. They detect prey by being warm. Maybe it's time for them to be fed. Maybe it's after, you know, evening hours, which brings up another point that I'll get into in a minute about routines. But at that point, you know, the snake is expecting to be fed. Perhaps they're in a hunting pose, which I'll show an example of. And now you slide open that door and you reach your hand in, and bam, you get nailed. And the snake wraps you. Wraps your hand, and you know, at that point you're like, what do I do? Well, it's not usually a very big deal. I mean, an adult boa can put a crunch on you and it can hurt. You know, I have gotten a bite from an adult Amarelli that was quite painful. Okay, this hurts. This really hurts. That was stupid of me. That was really stupid. I should have used a hook, but I didn't. And now I've got an Amarelli attached to my finger, and it does hurt. And that does actually hurt. So I'm just gonna wait for her to realize for a second that is not my... A lot of times they'll release on their own when they realize that you are not actually a prey item, which they often do. Sometimes, you know, if in the heat of the moment, they just don't release very quickly. And if you want that snake to get off you quickly, there's different ways of getting them off. The way that is tried and true is a little bit of alcohol, or hand sanitizer just rubbed in the corner of their mouth. They hate the taste of that, and they will let go immediately. So I always have some handy on my cart in my snake room, and I've used it for that case where that boa bit me and wrapped me and didn't want to let go, and it was hurting. So I just put a little bit of that hand sanitizer on her mouth, and she let go right away. No big deal. So that's a food response bite, and there's an easy way to avoid those. You know, number one is know your boa's body language. Establish a routine. You know, one thing I do is I really avoid handling my boas unless it's an emergency. I avoid handling them in evening hours because that is when they get fed. And I know that, you know, that is their routine. So if I'm going to, you know, come in the room and, you know, and it's already evening and, you know, the lights have gone out and they're all, you know, hanging over their water bowls in hunting mode, it's asking for trouble if I want to go in there and reach in and, you know, pull them out. That's really asking for trouble. So I don't do that, you know, I really don't. Now, if it was an emergency and I saw something in there and I had to get that snake out, yes, I would. But the way I would do it is I would tap them first. Now, tapping them involves touching them, you know, not hitting them, but touching them and stroking them with the snake hook. And you know, I will show you how I do that with a larger animal. I don't usually do it with the babies because with them it's not necessary. But with the middle size and larger size boas, as they get to be adults, I do start doing that with them, and it deactivates that feeding response right away. It works so well. So I will show you how I do that with one of them now. Okay, we're gonna take out, and this is actually the boa that did bite and rat me with a feeding response. This is Bianca. She's an adult Bolivian Amarylli, a young adult, and I'm going to show you how I would turn off her feeding response. So you can see her lying here, and what I would do is take my snake hook, and I'm just going to very gently stroke her. Very gently stroke her, just to let her know this is not time for feeding. I'm just going to come in here to pick you up. And at this point, I can now reach in and pick her up. So I'm putting this down, and I can reach in now, calmly pick her up. And here she is in all her beauty. And as I pick her up, I support her body. You know, she's kind of heavy-bodied, so I want to pick her up and support her so she doesn't get stressed. And here she is. And she's very calm, and she knows it's not time to feed. Look at her beautiful body, beautiful head. So that's how I address turning off the feeding response. But, you know, if I had just reached in there, she wouldn't know that, and she might strike at me, very likely. So we'll put her away. Here you go, Bianca. Come on, baby. Okay. Okay, here's my good buddy Tito, and he's just a great boy. He's a Terrahumera mountain boa, and he's just wonderful. So we've covered the defensive bites that you see with the babies, or the defensive reactions. And Terrahumera mountain boas are one of the boas that you often see a very defensive reaction with when they're young. Sometimes even when they're old, they'll hiss really loudly. They very rarely strike though. They're just very hissy as babies, and it's all a big bluff, but they're actually very, very docile, and they'll just sit in your hand like this for as long as you want. And we've also covered the feeding response strike, which is a more serious strike because in that case, the boa thinks you're food. It can also happen if you're actually feeding and you don't use the right kind of tongue or a long enough tongue, and the boa misses and goes and gets your hand instead of the tongue. And that's something you really don't want to happen. They can lose teeth. They can hurt you if you react and pull away. They can leave a tooth stuck in your hand. There's just a lot of reasons why you want to avoid that happening. And so those are the two types of bites. That's how I deal with them. And then in terms of handling and taming them down, I find just slow, confident, gentle handling, getting them used to touching the different parts of their body, letting them move through your hands and touching them. You know, I don't know if they love it, but they seem to be most tolerant of touching under the chin. And then as they get more tolerant of that, you can move to touching the sides of their faces and then the tops. Some don't like it much, but you get them used to touching, the back. And over time, just touching the different parts of their body, and they learn, that you're not a threat. You always end on a positive note, And it's just, over time, just building that trust, that confidence in them that you will never hurt them, and, that they feel safe with you. And, that's worked for me and my collection. All my animals are very handleable at this point. Do I still get bit? Occasionally. And it's, the babies, the little defensive babies when I first get them sometimes. Bite, and that's my bad. I mean, that's just me. I've slipped up. I've made a mistake. I was being quick, and I just made a mistake. Is it the end of the world? No, it's not. The boa didn't mean it. It's just a boa being what a boa is, hungry, and just getting confused. And you just move on from there, and you learn your lesson, and you just use your hook next time. So I hope that was helpful. I think the big thing is doing everything slowly, confidently, and building that boa's trust in you. And it really works for me. So I hope that was helpful. This is Lisa Benson, Benson's Boas. See you next week.